Katie, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Hi, Chris. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you. So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So, my name's Katie Lips, and I've had quite a broad and diverse career in digital technology across all sorts of things from building digital products for people to developing digital strategy to developing digital policy and advising consumers how to protect themselves from scams, advising governments also on how to protect consumers in the online space. I've worked in kind of tech for good businesses. I've set up my own startups as early ago as 2003. So I've had this really broad career, which has meant that throughout that time, I've just been hugely interested in data and in my own personal data and how I use it online and how other people use it online, and also in helping other people, be it consumers or just regular people, I guess, helping them to protect themselves in the online world. And as someone who's been around the block a bit in terms of their digital career, obviously when I started work, the internet was a sort of much tinier space than it is today. It was much simpler. There weren't as many threats or dangers out there. And today, whilst the opportunities for people to do amazing stuff is enormous, we can, put our whole lives online, and also use the internet for fabulous things like improving our health, for example. Whilst all of that's absolutely brilliant, we're all much more at risk, as you, of course, and your listeners all know. So I'm just interested in that intersection of how can we build great products that really help people online whilst at the same time protecting them. And that's been an interest throughout my career, which is why I guess I'm here today to talk a little bit about what I'm up to.
Absolutely. So, to me, it's interesting because growing up, uh, kind of this, our data was never something that we really thought a whole lot about. It was often stored in paper in vast file cabinets and vaults, and at some point the sprinklers broke and the paper got wet and our data was gone, the information about us. But with the advent of computers, more and more of that has gotten digitized, and in a lot of cases that's advantageous. People who, if your doctor's office needs records, they can access that sort of thing quicker and faster. But then come the advent of the internet, and now it's that data is potentially moving places that we don't know where it's going or what it's being used for. So let's spend some time talking about kind of health data privacy, and what our exposure risks are, what we can do about it as consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a fascinating space, isn't it? And I think actually COVID opened everyone's eyes to just how useful data could be in the health space. I mean, I guess we all knew that data can generally help everything. If you have good data and you have the ability to analyze it well and use it properly, it can do all sorts of stuff. You can do all sorts of stuff with it. But in the health space, it really hit home for regular folk, if you like, that data is hugely important. And I'm sure in the States, as much as in the UK, we've all been asked to share our data during the pandemic about, tests that we were
Yeah.
having. Were we testing positive? Where had we been? Some of us were tracking our movements to see, to help people study the spread of the disease. And I think that was a really good example of how, at scale, data could actually help fix huge problems like that. And obviously, a cure wasn't found, but vaccines were, and lots of lives were saved. So I think that's a good example, and one where perhaps for some of us it was an obvious choice to share our data. For others of us, it was perhaps a really scary thing. We didn't
Yeah.
want to. I was very much on the fence. I could see the benefits of it, but I could also see that if not treated really, really well, who was going to get access to this in the future? How long did they want it for? And for how long were they going to use it? Were they going to delete it? All these things that I just
Yeah.
knew in a rush that people weren't really considering. Because I was building something in a rush, there were things that you wouldn't have time to consider, right? So you're sort of in this emergency situation where you're being asked for your data about stuff. You know it could help you and others. Do you trust it all? Maybe, maybe not. So I think that that opened everybody's eyes to the fact that data is really important in the health space, which is a good thing. But of course, you're right. People have been using digital health products for ages, and many of us use Fitbits or connected watches or whatever to monitor our actual physiology. As I'm wearing my Apple Watch, it's probably listening to my heartbeat right now. Oh my God, isn't that a terrifying prospect, really? And why is that necessary? But it's just stuff that you set up once, you forget about. And then all of a sudden, there's this enormous slew of data about things that you don't even think about anymore. Also, in the health space, things like calorie tracking. So, plenty of people who want to lose weight. I left my corporate life because I lost a lot of weight and wanted to share a kind of weight loss product with people. And I know loads of people who do calorie counting on their phone using apps. They're basically telling another company every single thing they eat, right? Now, that can be great if you get the data back about the insights so that you can track, oh, I've eaten more calories than I'd like, or I tend to eat lots of calories at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Is there a way I could stop that? Or, I'm eating too many carbs or not enough carbs or whatever it is. If you get the insights back from the data you're giving up, then I think it's possibly a fair exchange. But in a lot of services that I see, it's a bit one way.
Yeah.
And when it comes to health related data, I think that that's possibly opening people up to problems. And the problems are many. So they start with things like, there's more cyber risk of being scammed if your data falling into the wrong hands and then you being scammed as a result of that. There's more risk of just companies getting more data about you than you'd possibly like them to have for a purpose that is ill-defined. And then there's the risk of you don't really know what might happen with that data in the future, or who it might be sold on to, or even who it could be inadvertently used by. So the idea that, maybe someone talks about, use the weight loss example again, how much weight they've lost or what they're eating or how much exercise they're doing. Maybe they post lots of pictures on Instagram and things like that. Now, Instagram may not be doing anything bad with their data, but anyone can come along and look at that
Yeah.
and get a picture of that person. So you have to always consider, certainly on social platforms, who else is in the room, I think. And when it comes to health data, I think that as consumers and patients, but let's say people, as people, we're not quite attuned really to the future issues that might bite us when it comes to the health data that we're sharing and whom we're sharing it with.
Yeah, I know as people, we're not good with foreseeing unintended consequences of things. I remember a great example of the U.S. military at one point banned the use of maybe let's just call it Fitbit or any type of fitness trackers because they realized that it was uploading GPS coordinates of military service members.
So obviously, there are different ways that different types of data is governed, and health data is actually governed by much stricter rules and regulations than regular personal data is governed. And that makes sense. It means that people who officially take care of your health data, your personal health record, etc., have to treat that very, very carefully indeed, and that they make sure that that's not going to fall into the wrong hands. But actually, when you look at where we are as consumers with digital health, our understanding and our experience of it goes far wider than just when you go and visit your doctor or you go to hospital for something. It's much broader. It it covers everything through all sorts of different types of lifestyle data, your exercise, things you might eat. It might include weight loss, it might include personal care stuff, it could include a whole bunch of stuff. And actually, what's happening is organizations and companies are able to infer things about your health based on your personal lifestyle
Hmm.
data. So there's no need to kind of regulate that, especially as health data. It can all just abide by the standard rules that personal data needs to abide by, which is okay in the main, but it can actually be really problematic because some companies might think, okay, I want to know about how healthy someone is. I'm just going to go and look at their social media and find out. And actually, for a lot of people, it's all there,
Yeah.
right? So if you're someone that uploads your run data, or I'm just saying I've been for a run or whatever, then it knows that you've got some exercise going on and you're probably trying to be quite healthy. If you're the kind of person, as you were saying, who likes a lot of chocolate, then it's going to know that about you, which may be absolutely fine. But there are certain lifestyle behaviors that may impact a risk profile negatively for you from a life insurer or health insurer, for example. And things like saying, I like zip lining, bungee jumping, skiing, extreme or what could be seen as extreme or risky sports might impact a life insurance premium. Similarly, going down the pub a lot and
Yeah.
or going out to bars and looking like you're someone who drinks alcohol more often than other people would also negatively impact you. But people seem completely comfortable with sharing this data in environments that they believe are kind of safe spaces. It's just them and their friends, or them and a community of like-minded individuals on the internet, because we've not got that eye on what sits behind, who else can see, who else can be in that room and in that space,
Hmm.
and ultimately who else can either directly take that data through approved like APIs into the service, or who can just scrape the data because it's actually just sitting there on a web page. So I think we need to be a little bit more cautious and cognizant of that other side of it, and just think, is that something we really want to share for how it is today, or and are we aware that it could be taken in a different context by somebody else?
So, like, I know here in the U.S. we've had legislative changes on abortion rights, and without getting into the pros or cons of that, that by no means that is definitely not the point of mentioning it. But there was suddenly this great concern for women in states where that's no longer a legal service, that if they have applications that are tracking their menstrual cycles, that data suddenly becomes potentially risky for them. And like, okay, where is this data being stored? Who has access to it? What previously was not a year ago wasn't a concern, and all of a sudden now it is, depending on the circumstances, could be a jail sentence or
Right.
be used as evidence in a court case against them.
Yeah. Um, yes, I think that's a really good example of the unintended consequences, both of the user in using a service that, could be something you set up to track your cycle, and then ends up being so utterly, you know, terrifying in terms of how that could be potentially used if it falls into the wrong hands. But it's not even that it's the wrong hand. We're not even talking about cyber criminals anymore.
Yeah,
We're just talking about changes in legislation that could make something that what you think is completely legal and acceptable one month completely not legal and acceptable another month. And we as systems designers or product designers are also not thinking in terms of that level of unintended consequences. And that's a real challenge for businesses setting up products, because you design your product for like best case scenario, everyone's going to come and use my product and they're going to love it and it's going to be brilliant and everyone's going to be happy. You don't design products thinking, God, this awful thing's going to happen,
yeah.
and then we're going to be putting people at risk accidentally and completely, what we didn't intend to, but we might be doing that. And so I suppose I'm advocating for people definitely doing some unintended consequence thinking, because I
Hmm.
think that's an important part of a data strategy. You have to worry about what bad stuff can happen with it, as opposed to just what the good stuff that you want to achieve is.
Do you see, because I know that you're working on health products now in that space. Do you see maybe a push from developers rather than storing the data in the cloud on their own servers about their customers, even if it's anonymized or whatever, but rather saying, okay, well, let's move the data, leave the data on the device and move the analysis rather than the analysis being done in the cloud, move the analysis of the data to the device so that the developer never actually sees any of the data.
Yeah, that's something that we're working on at the moment with my latest project that I'm working on, because you you can look at this several ways. So the old way of thinking, if you were building a data product, and people, when when people were building a startup in the old days, we'd say, oh, it's a data play, which basically meant your job was to go and grab as much customer data as you could. And you didn't necessarily know what you wanted it for
Yeah.
or what you were going to do with it, but you would grab everything you could. So you'd profile people, you'd ask them a bunch of questions, you'd track a bunch of things, you'd then figure out what in there is useful and valuable to you. And I think there's a shift now. I hope there's a shift. I think some people are definitely still in that kind of bad old school way of thinking.
Yeah.
But I think there are plenty more businesses who are thinking, actually, no, we want to be privacy preserving. And the reason why is trust, because if your customers don't trust your service, you don't have a customer base
Yeah.
and you don't have a business. So you have to be more trustworthy nowadays. And we hear scare stories all the time. Some accidental, awful data breaches, but some just sort of sloppy thinking in terms of how data is handled, or just actual commercial deals that aren't any good for the end user. Um, and so I definitely think there's a move towards wanting to store data on the device and never let it leave there, so that, if I want to tell my phone everything I'm eating in the day and track my calories and track my weight, and that's very personal to me, it's important if that's my mission to lose weight, let's say. But I certainly don't want that. I don't want anyone knowing. I don't want that to end up on, social media, um, or to fall into the wrong hands and allow that to mean that I'm the victim of a sort of scam. So definitely storing it on the device and definitely doing the analysis on the device. And maybe there's some angle of like aggregate data that you can then say, okay, generally people, here are the general stats of what
Yeah.
people did, but not owning, I don't want to own all the data about what every single individual ate every day or did every day, because actually as a business owner that gives me a huge level of responsibility that maybe I don't need. And I actually, if you think about it more from a future perspective, we don't need to do that anymore because it can be handled by the device.
Yeah.
um, and for example, we're building our prototype for our app in for iOS, native iOS app, and we're using Health Kit and Research Kit, provided by Apple, to sort of pull bits of data together and help you manage and store that safely on device so that you don't need to own it and worry about it, which I think is great. There are great tools for developers out there
Hmm.
to help them behave in that much more data preserving way.
Yeah, man, I like the idea of a company being able to say, look, there's no data that can be, not that there's no data, there is no database that can be compromised on our side. We build an app, it does this, we might see some wide-ranging analytics or some aggregate data, but if there's if someone does get into our database, there's nothing there is nothing there for them to get. Is to me,
Yeah,
like, as a company, I'd be happy to have a minimized cybersecurity risk.
that's right. I think you're completely right, and I hope that more and more businesses are shifting towards that mindset and that strategy. And as they are, then we'll see much less risk for consumers. And if they're not, it's often because what they're doing isn't quite right.
Yeah.
So I've seen a few businesses in the health space at the moment who are, if you, at the consumer level, you won't see it. You'd only see it if you research the company a little
Hmm.
bit and found out, there are plenty of businesses in this space taking investment from, let's say, insurance tech firms or funds because they're still being a data play. They're still
Yeah.
thinking you just grab the consumer health data and there must be a use for it. You must be able to then sell that to health insurers, which I find quite scary, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the challenge. Is like, to me, I think, when it comes to, if I'm going and seeing a doctor, if I'm on the way to the hospital because something unknown has happened to me, I want doctors to be able to have access to all relevant health data as quickly as possible. But the flip side is, if they don't need it for life-saving emergencies, I don't want them sharing that data with each other. My optometrist doesn't need to know what my cardiologist thinks about me, or things like that, unless
Yeah.
it's a life-saving emergency. So to me, it's trying to balance those. Okay, what data should be segregated, what data should be allowed to merged, and how does that benefit me as a consumer, not not the pocketbook of the company that I'm working with.
Right. I think that's absolutely right. And there's an ethical debate, I suppose, or issue that needs really careful consideration because we're moving. Digital transformation is enabling all healthcare providers to move from an era of, let's say, sick care. I know they call it healthcare, but it's really sick care.
Yeah,
In the olden days, up until now, let's say, you go to the doctor when you're sick
yeah,
and to get fixed. So you have a problem and they fix it. But actual, maybe real healthcare is where they keep you healthy as opposed to waiting for you to get sick. Now, to keep you healthy, you've got to know how someone might get sick and then prevent it.
yeah,
And for that, you probably do need a lot of data analyzed brilliantly by some very clever people, right? So we probably, as patients, should opt into systems like that. Whereas at the moment, I think we're still a bit too much in the era of sick care.
yeah.
And only when we get much more advanced data systems can we move effectively to that era of proper health, preventative healthcare.
And that's always going to be the challenge: is, do people, if you know you're not living a healthy lifestyle, do you want your health care, not your sick care, your health care provider knowing that you're not living in a healthy fashion? are,
Yeah,
are
and
they going to raise your rates? Are they going to come knocking on your door saying, "Hey, why aren't you exercising more?"
it's quite scary, isn't it? Because um, I mean, my story is that I used to live quite unhealthily. I used to drink a fair amount of alcohol, not a massive amount, but a fair amount, more than I do now. I used to overeat food and I put a lot of weight on. And then I decided to do something about all of that and I lost a lot of weight. I lost about 90 pounds. And so that is my sort of story and the reason behind why I'm starting my new business
Hmm.
in the health space to help other people do the same. But if you go to, as you say, Chris, if you go to a health provider and say, I'm behaving unhealthily, then could that be held against you? That's a real worry. It might stop people for looking for help. Or you need to find an alternative provider who's not aligned with those systems that could make bad decisions about you, who can just help you to change your habits, let's say, or to start behaving a little bit more healthily or doing some nicer things for yourself, let's say. So um, there is this really fine balance because also, healthcare providers, they don't really want to put people off. They do want
Yeah,
to prevent disease and they do genuinely, I hope, want to help fix people when they get ill, and that involves knowing the full extent of the problem. I mean, you
Hmm.
can't go to the doctors and say, "Oh, I've got like a problem with my leg," but then not tell them that you fell over and bumped it or whatever it is. I mean, you've got to be honest about what the cause of the root cause is, otherwise it
Yeah.
can't be fixed.
I mean, and I think we're starting to see some of that now. I have a life insurance policy that um, my health behavior does not affect the rate on the policy, but my health behavior affects whether or not they're going to have to pay out. If that makes sense. If I'm healthier, then they're not going to have to pay out on an inopportune death. So one of the things that this particular provider does is um, if you, we will give you an Apple Watch for free, and if you exercise a certain amount, that you report report your blood pressure, and you earn points for if you go see your doctor, and if you earn enough points, they waive the cost of the Apple Watch. And so they're kind of incentivizing, rather than raising your rates because of bad behavior, we're going to give you a toy for good behavior. And I totally understand it. I worked in life insurance for a while, and I understand, like, if you can get your customers to behave, if you get your clients to be healthier, they're going to die less, and as an insurance company, you're going to make, you're going to have to not pay out on the policies, and you're going to make more money. It's in your interest to keep your clients healthy, and so they found a way of doing it which more aligns with my values in terms of, I'm in control of what data I share with them. And if I decide I want to stop sharing at any point, then I just pay the balance off of the watch. But it's kind of an interesting idea of starting to see we're going to incentivize good behavior as opposed to punish bad behavior.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, actually, isn't it? Um, and yes, there are plenty of schemes out there that will incentivize good behavior, but I think people have to be slightly careful that they're not paying for these devices with their data,
Yeah,
which it kind of sounds a bit like that is that.
there's a
And
certain amount of it.
there's a scheme in the UK like that as well, with I think a couple of the health providers. Um, it sounds nice and shiny, doesn't it? Get a device, but ultimately the device is just tracking you
Yes.
to and even if it's giving you an incentive to be healthy that benefits everybody, 'cause it benefits them and you, um, it's also gathering a lot of data that they can use in aggregate to refine their risk profiles about people in general. So
Yep.
I think if you are somebody who understands this stuff though,
Yeah.
right? Plenty of people who are taking up this deal don't quite understand that data
Yeah.
exchange and the implications of it. Now, I don't know quite what I would suggest. I'm not suggesting that everyone needs to go and become like a data expert and really understand this stuff, but I am advocating that companies like that healthcare provider are a bit more honest and upfront about that value exchange with
Yeah.
their customers so that everybody understands really what they're getting themselves into.
Yeah. And I think transparency is going to be one of these future looking things that we're going to see talked about a lot more when we install apps on phones. I mean, I think
Yeah,
we're starting to see it now. The platforms are now saying, you know, this is what systems your app is requesting access to. If I'm installing an app to track my weight, they don't need access to my contacts. They don't need access to my camera and the microphone and, who knows what else, my network
yeah,
settings and my GPS data. They only need access to, like through Apple's HealthKit. They just need access to
yeah,
my weight, and that's it.
yeah,
And so I think we're starting to see people get more aware of, you know, reviewing, well, what data are my apps really asking for, whether it's health data or just, aggregate data. I
yeah.
hopefully we're going to start seeing that more when we're dealing with other business entities. Like, what are you doing with this data? And people start asking that question. And I've asked that at a few places, and the people are like, I don't at the front desk are I don't know where this data goes. I don't know what it's used for. I don't know why we need it. And so
Yeah,
my response is, well, am I required to fill this out on the form? They're like, no. Well, you should be asking for it then if you don't really need it. But I think
yeah.
people have to start getting more conscious about what data you're providing, what information you're voluntarily giving up.
I think that's the thing. And if you're curious, or cautious or worried at all, always ask. And if you don't get an answer you like, don't do it. I
Yeah,
mean, I think we should all be encouraged to ask that question more often, because if we do, then companies will listen to that. They'll know that it's awkward when they're asked. They're like, don't know. And if that's not a good position to be in, they'll come up with better answers, or they'll change their practices, but they'll only do that if more people ask.
yeah. I mean, yeah. If they truly don't need whatever they're asking, and enough people say, "Why are you asking this?" they'll stop asking for it.
Yeah.
So what is this product that you're currently working on, your startup?
Yeah, so I mentioned my weight loss journey, and I lost a lot of weight. I lost 90 pounds, and I wrote a book about it actually, which I've got here, which is called Love Yourself and Lose Weight. Um, and that was really the catalyst for me. I wrote about self-love and how anybody could use it to kind of take a bit of a break in their behavior and think about, if they wanted to make a personal change, be it weight loss or something else, how they could do that. But then a lot of people say, but what did you eat all day long? I mean, the book doesn't really tell me what you ate. Were you on a
Yeah.
diet? How many calories? How far did you run? Blah, blah, blah. And everyone wanted to know the specifics. And so I've been working on a product more recently to talk about my weight loss method, which was conscious eating and just slowing down, taking time. Done a research study recently and interviewed a lot of people and found that 78% of people mostly eat everything on their plate. And that's people in the UK and Europe and the US. Just you get a plate of food and it all goes in.
Well,
And
I
I
mean,
think,
how many times as kids were we told, clean your
right,
plate?
we're all told to do it. Don't leave
The,
anything. It's rude to leave things. It's wasteful.
there's starving kids.
Economic
You need
climate.
to eat too much because there's starving kids in some far off land, and you should be
Yes.
grateful for what you have. Therefore, finish your plate.
Yes. Don't upset the starving kids by leaving food over here. That would be bad. So we're all brought up with that, and that's what we do. And I believe that that causes weight gain. And so I'm building out this method and platform with free content and an app to help people to not do that, to just take more time, slow down, eat really slowly, think about what you're eating a lot more, enjoy it a lot more, not worry about what it is, not necessarily go on a diet. Don't start eating lettuce or cabbage every day if you don't want to. Keep eating your chocolate, but just do it more thoughtfully. And so some people call it conscious eating, some people call it mindful eating. My business is going to be called Eaterful, and we're going to be launching this product for people who want to lose anything from just a tiny bit of weight up to a lot of weight through a much more easy, enjoyable, and sustainable method.
and,
So
and
that's what we're
hope
doing.
and hopefully you won't be collecting lots of data.
No, we won't. But it is going to be data driven. So that's an interesting point actually, Chris, because when I was losing weight, I had to learn about what worked for me. And I
Hmm.
didn't just start a thing one day and then a few months later I'd lost all this weight. I had to trial and error, test and learn, and iterate and kind of figure it out and figure out what works. And so our product helps you do that by learning about your own habits. So it helps you track your habits and then get insight into your habits. But as to what we were talking about earlier, we're not going to be storing a massive amount of data. The data is stored on the device, the analytics happen on the device. You get to learn about what works for you without us knowing a whole bunch of stuff about you, which I think is a really nice way of looking at it.
I like that perspective. And what will the website for that be?
So yeah, so the product's called Eaterful, and the website is weareeaterful.com.
Awesome. And if people want to find more about you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so I'm at katielips.com, where I talk about conscious eating in general and a bit about what I'm up to. And I've got lots of free resources for people who want to learn more about that side of things. I also sometimes talk on there about data and data strategy, and I'm on LinkedIn where I talk a lot more about that side of things as well.
A little bit more on that. Yeah, the data conversations are more appropriate for LinkedIn.
It is, yeah.
We will make sure to link all those resources so people can find them easily on the podcast notes page. Katie, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Chris, thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.